Hello and welcome to the Stonebridge Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Goodman, and with me in New York is Michael Palmer.
Hey.
We are here talking with Gilles Poitras, and Gilles is the author of our recently published Tokyo Stroll. It's a guidebook to Tokyo. It's stuffed with photos and maps and all kinds of places to go. You can tell from the subtitle, it's a guide to city sidetracks and easy explorations. So that'll tell you two things. One, it's not your normal tourist guidebook. And also, it's a guidebook for people who are looking to have a nice, easy time of it. We're not going to send you hiking up Mount Fuji or into the woods. So it's a great guidebook to have. And if you want to find more about it, before I forget, I want to guide you to our website, which is www.stonebridge.com. You can find all about Tokyo Stroll there. You can even order it and buy it at your favorite online vendor. You can also go into a bookstore, and I'd love it actually if you went into a bookstore and asked for the books so that we can make sure the bookstores are all keeping it. But without further ado, let me just talk to Gilles and welcome him here. Hi, Gilles.
Hello.
We talked with you once before the book came out, and we're talking with you now because you just got back from a nearly month-long stay in that city of cities, Tokyo. And I just want to hear a lot about what travel in Japan is like these days, how it's changed, and your experiences there, and especially what it was like using your book, visiting some of the places that you actually featured, and any guidance you can give for people who buy the book and maybe how best to use it. So first off, I understand, everyone's going to be happy about this. On April 29th, Japan formally lifted all of its COVID entry restrictions, and you don't need to show that you have proof of vaccination, and you can go anywhere, and you don't have to beg permission. But I understand still a lot of people are masking up. So what is it like going to Japan now, post-pandemic?
Like you said, a lot of people are still masking up, and I think a lot of that is out of courtesy to others. And we made a point of masking up in crowds and on the trains and inside buildings wherever we went.
When was the last time you were in Tokyo? Was it
2019? I did a trip to get more photos for the book.
Right.
Train fares had gone slightly up, and food prices were slightly up because the war in Ukraine has disrupted international transit with fuel prices being more expensive, and Japan imports a lot of food. And of course, grain prices going up.
Grain prices, right.
And then the avian flu wiping out a big chunk of the chicken population in Japan, making the eggs more expensive, just like it has here. Food prices were up a little bit. Actually, there's one thing I can state. The train stations and subway stations now have added even more escalators and elevators. They did a big push before the Olympics to add those in, and they've added quite a few more in. If you've got trouble with your legs, or if you're elderly or disabled, it's a lot easier to get around by mass transit now. I almost never had to use stairs. And by the way, I did stumble across the smallest escalator in Japan. It's an escalator that takes you up 3 steps.
So if you have advice for anyone planning a trip to Tokyo, aside from buying your book and studying it and getting the EPUB version and putting that on your phone as well, what are some things that people ought to bone up on in advance and prepare for?
Well, one thing to be aware of is climate. You don't want to go in the rainy season. You don't want to go in the heat of summer when it's incredibly humid and nasty. I usually recommend people go in October, November, or for New Year's. And if you've lived in most of the U.S., Tokyo around New Year's is not that cold. You'll need a jacket. You'll need some warm clothes. But I grew up in Central Valley in California, and it's a lot colder there than it is in Tokyo. New Year's is also a delightful time to be there because everything shuts down for like 3 days, except the restaurants near the big temples and shrines and the transit system. So you could actually walk to Ginza when there's nobody there, except an occasional car. I was down by the Bank of Japan, which is normally bustling with people, and I took a photograph of one guy 4 blocks away crossing the street. It's quite a contrast.
Yeah.
This was my first May trip And it was kind of interesting because it overlapped with Golden Week.
And you should explain what is Golden Week.
Okay, Golden Week is the result of several holidays in close proximity early in May. And what people do is they take regular vacation days on the days that are not holidays. So there's a week in which a huge percentage of the Japanese population is traveling. And my advice would be is if you plan to hit certain big places like Akihabara or major shrines, avoid doing so during Golden Week. They are packed. I'd always heard that a lot of people left Tokyo. So I figured, oh, okay, well, we're going to be in Tokyo. A lot of people leaving Tokyo is not going to be an issue.
Right.
None of the articles and online things I read about it mentioned a huge amount of people go to Tokyo. Boy,
Right.
when we got off the train at Akihabara Station planning to grab a quick bite, and we just headed straight for the subway. We just got out of there. It was just incredible.
Yeah.
And we were based in Asakusa, and it was packed. And then Golden Week's over, and it's all back to normal. It was an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you stayed in Asakusa, which is the old, kind of the old part of Tokyo by the big Asakusa Kanon temple there. And what kind of place do you stay in?
We stay in a little family-run ryokan. It's most people think of ryokan as really fancy places that are expensive and luxurious out in the country. Nah, this place is like tatami mats, futons on the floor, cushions, little tiny table, simple traditional room, toilets down the hall, showers downstairs, no frills, inexpensive, and most importantly, it's in Asakusa.
Yeah, yeah. So how inexpensive is inexpensive?
3,500 yen a night.
Wow.
So it's like a little over $30 a night.
That's pretty unbelievable. And that's, I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, Asakusa may be downtown, but it's not like gritty, dangerous, staying in the most horrible part of the worst American city. This is, I mean, it's still, it's safe to walk around. I mean, all you're giving up are the frills.
Yeah. And Asakusa is wonderful for transit because it's on the Ginza line for the subway. And that goes to so many top locations or to train stations that will get you on a good transfer to other locations. So the Ginza line in general is a nice place to put yourself when you're visiting Tokyo. Makes transit a lot easier. And it's right on the Sumidagawa River, so you can take the water buses. And it's the neighborhood. I just love the neighborhood. It's very low key, not a wealthy neighborhood, but the people are really cordial. They're used to visitors. And, it was good to be back again.
I wanted to ask you, your book has a kind of a unique component to it. It does have printed maps on the inside, which if you're carrying the book around, you can find your way using those maps, which are actually fairly detailed because there's small local area maps with maybe just a couple blocks showing on them. But those maps are all kind of linked to an online mapping system. Would you explain that and tell me how's it work in practice?
In practice, it works really well. We were able to navigate some pretty narrow and labyrinthine areas. What I did is I created a large set of bookmarks for everything that's in the book, which people can download from my website. And I recommend the application called Maps.me, which is free and available for, Google devices and iOS devices, either phones or tablets. And with it, you can import the bookmarks and you can turn them on and off. So you can have the bookmarks that show what is in the book. And so you can zoom in and out really easily. And you also, with Maps.me, do not need to be online. It's an offline reader. So like me, I could have my phone, I could use it for calls and texting, but my provider does not provide data access outside the country. So I didn't need it. If you prefer Google Maps, you can also import the bookmarks into Google Maps. And then I mentioned earlier, I have a web supplement, and things that are mentioned in a web supplement, I have a separate set of bookmarks for.
So how does that work? When you got your phone, you call up the map, and I guess if you're not actually online, it doesn't geolocate you. You have to do that yourself. But once you've kind of found your location, you can use that to trace which way to go.
Actually, if your device has GPS, it does geolocate you. Yeah, some tablets don't. But you just zoom out until you see the little icon that indicates where you are, and then you zoom back in.
Well, that's very cool. I guess it was not just you. Did all you guys have the maps feature on your phones and use it?
Quite a few people did, and at one point, I showed what I was doing to one fellow, and he immediately started downloading it on his phone at that point. And within like a matter of like 10 minutes, he had imported the bookmarks, which amazed me because it's not the most straightforward thing in the world to be doing while you're standing on a street corner in Tokyo.
Right. So, Giles, this is the kind of thing that you can pull up on the street if you have nothing to do and find like a restaurant.
Yeah, it will show you, has little icons for restaurants and things, just like Google Maps does. Now, one of the distinctions I realized on the trip was Google Maps and the Maps.me maps emphasize different things. So if you're interested in shopping and eating, Google Maps is really strong. But if you're interested in looking at temples and shrines, the Maps.me maps highlight those with different colored icons, whereas in Google Maps, they tend to fade back. If you've got access to both, you might be wanting to switch back and forth, depending on what you're doing, because they each have advantages.
How does the Tokyo Stroll, the maps, and the web supplement work in terms of finding locations that are in buildings that are, 5-6 stories high?
The thing is, the maps in Maps.me are crowdsourced. So there's a project called OpenStreetMap, and in OpenStreetMap, people can add information and details about cities. Tokyo is really in good shape for this. Kyoto, for example, is lacking a lot of detail. But in a large complex, you can actually designate where shops are within that complex. So if you're talking about the big complex around Tokyo Skytree, there are museums and other things located there, the jump store and so forth. And that's true, for, several of the large buildings in Akihabara and so forth. And I've also been active both in Google Maps and OpenStreetMap in relation to the book. And I've added close to 500, added to close to 500 entries in both of those. Because in some cases, they only had the kanji. So I added the Roman form. In some cases, they had the location wrong. And so I corrected the location. In some cases, they had nothing, so I added it.
We should point out that Giles is an ex-librarian, and so
and kind of compulsive about organizing
very
stuff.
meticulous about the data.
Yeah. I mean, Google Maps amused me because there were 2 cases in which there were Buddhist temples right next to each other, but they had the names wrong.
Oh, they have switched, yeah.
Yeah, they had them switched, so I switched them to the correct form. And luckily, in the book, it was great because I simply switched the numbers on the maps in the book.
So, what are some of the really neat places that you went to? Both the places that you knew and were looking forward to revisiting, and places you discovered.
Well, we did go to Sugurajima, which is not in the book. I have an entry on the web supplement on my website for that neighborhood. Some of us went to the Ikebukuro area, and we went through like Zozoji Temple area, not Zozoji, excuse me. Anyway, we went through many of the cemeteries in that area. I found Lafcadio Hearn's grave, for example, and a Zoshigaya cemetery. And I had met up with a former coworker, and we hit places there. That's also not in the book. It's on the supplement. But things in the book, we hit some shops in the Ginza, some places in Nihonbashi, Yingyocho, which is always the delight to show people because of all the older shops there. Did a little walk along the Sumida-gawa. We went through the Imperial Palace gardens, starting at north, going south. My advice is do it that way. You're going downhill. If you do it the other way, your legs are going to be giving out towards the end of the walk.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's quite a hike. So, yeah, there's a variety of things we hit.
Well, with 28 days there, I guess you had pretty much could have gone to almost every place is mentioned in the book at that rate. But how are the merchants doing? Did they mostly survive? And like all the places that are in your book, they're still there, right?
They're still there. The thing I discovered during the delay in the pandemic on publishing the book was that stores that closed tended to be ones that depended upon people traveling into Tokyo. So Tora no Ana, which had 7 stores in Japan, 3 of them in Akihabara, now has 1 store in all of Japan, and because their clientele were mostly Japanese taking trains into Tokyo and foreign tourists who were interested in anime and manga.
What kind of store is that?
Tora no Ana sells anime goods, manga goods, and mostly publications, books, but they were also a major store for self-published works. They had like 4 or 5 stories worth of space devoted just to self-published works. And I was going to go look for photography books. They closed their Akihabara store, which was the major one to find such interesting things.
So is that because Japanese people were not going into Tokyo? They were all working at home the way that we are here?
Well, it wasn't so much people working. It was people who would come into Tokyo to go shopping.
And they stopped doing that?
They pretty much stopped doing that.
Oh.
And from what I've been able to tell, I went to Nakano Broadway and a large number of the stores were gone. And that's a similar situation. That's heavily anime, manga, pop culture fans. The little record store I always used to go to was gone.
Well, I mean, I suppose the pandemic might have had something to do with it, but I wonder if it was also a result of people buying stuff online now.
No, not really. The stuff a lot of people would go to get in Nakano Broadway, a lot of it is secondhand stuff in really excellent shape. A lot of those dealers are not selling online because they've got like 1 copy of each item.
Yeah, I see.
Unless you're a big outfit like Mandarake, and Mandarake held on because they do a lot of online.
So the place that you went to, though, they're not catering to that particular clientele, and they were there. Were they happy to see you? Oh, good. The tourists are back.
The tourists are back. Believe me, the tourists were back.
Were they really?
There are plenty of guys. I ran into 2 Frenchmen looking for Goldorak stuff in Akihabara. And I said, guys, no, you got to go to Nakano Broadway for anything that's literally more than 6 months old, because Akihabara is pretty much just the latest and greatest thing. It doesn't have much of the old stuff. And so I gave them directions to the train station, and they just literally zoomed off to the train station.
Like we say, I mean, almost all the stores that are featured in your book and are on the map, they're all still there?
Oh, yeah. I think only 1 has closed, and that was because...
That's amazing.
The owner was having health problems, and they decided to shut down, which is a shame, because that was Wing Club. And Wing Club just made these gorgeous handcrafted replicas of airplanes and stuff. I mean, the Smithsonian and the British Museum have them in their collection. They used to sell the stuff in their stores also. Wing Club is gone, but that's about it. Everything else has pretty much survived.
So the book is still up to date, and everyone should get a copy, right?
Yeah. And if you're in Tokyo, the Marunouchi, the big bookstore, Maruzen bookstore, Marunouchi has copies of it.
Oh, good. That is great to know.
They did a few weeks ago.
So let me ask you a little broader question. We were talking before we began recording, and I asked you if you went anywhere else, and you said, no, I spent my 28 days in Tokyo. Where else is there to go? Most people go to Japan, and I still hear it's like, oh, we're only going to spend 3 days in Tokyo, and then we're going to go to Kyoto and see all the temples and Nara and all that stuff. That's not you. And so do you divide the Japan tourism world into 2 parts, like those who find Tokyo a world unto itself, absolutely, totally sufficient for all your needs? And then there are those other people who want to go out and, do all the other stuff. And if so, what is about Tokyo that really appeals to you?
There are numerous factors. One, I love history. So I read a lot about Tokyo history. I'm currently finishing up reading a book on Sensoji Temple in the Edo period. The book is called Prayer and Play in Late Tokugawa Japan, which is it's a fascinating scholarly study just on the Sensoji Temple complex and the entertainments associated with that part of Tokyo. I could be walking down the street and I could spot a shrine I have read about that looks just totally nondescript, and I know the history. So I get excited about that.
Right.
And that kind of stuff I folded into the book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm the type of guy when he watches a movie or anime or reads a manga, I want to identify the locations I'm seeing in the story, you know, and kind of like peeling an onion with Tokyo. You peel one layer off, you got another layer underneath. And because it's got this rich history, which quite frankly only goes back largely from 1600 on.
That's right.
There's stuff earlier. And then you've got the immediate adjacent areas, because, you know, not limited just to Tokyo. You can go to Yokohama, you can go out to Enoshima, Kawasaki, you know, you can go up to Chiba, Saitama. But, you know, I want to walk the streets. I want to, you know, explore the little back alleys, you know, the little tiny Jizo statue, literally physically in the middle of a block that can only be accessed by a walkway where you can touch both sides easily. That type of detail I love.
And now we are talking about a megalopolis with, I don't know, what is it?
Right.
20, 25 million people living in the Tokyo metro area?
Well, the larger Tokyo metro area is about 30 million.
30 million.
Tokyo itself is 14.5 million in Tokyo. And it's not just the history. You got modern architecture, got incredible modern buildings, you know, near the major stations, or even on small streets, you'll find people have had architects design delightful houses for themselves, all sorts of things. So, in other words, I'm enthusiastic.
Well, you're like a deep diver as opposed to someone who just sort of wants I don't want to call it superficial, but someone who sort of wants to see a lot, but inherently can't get into a lot of depth. You like the depth, and like with many things Japanese, once you start looking at one thing, then you realize there's like a whole tradition behind it, a whole history that you can keep delving into.
Oh yeah, you can just hop from one thing to the other and keep going.
And I guess from what you're saying, it's kind of like Tokyo is this huge, huge city, but when you're in a particular neighborhood, you just feel like you're in a little town.
Yeah, very much so. The heavily urban part of Tokyo is divided into 23 ku. In the old days, they were just wards of the city government itself. But in the post-war restructuring, they became independent cities with their own governor, own mayors, and so forth. And each one of those has its own feel to it. And one thing about Tokyo is if you're in a busy, busy area with crowds and lots of noise and activity, walk 2 or 3 blocks away from the main street and you're just in the quietest little residential areas or little tiny shopping zone. You know, it's incredible diversity in a small space.
Are there any more tips or advice that you have for people planning to go?
Be aware of the fact that a lot of small businesses do not take credit cards. It's still, in many ways, for mom and pop businesses, cash economy.
Oh.
So expect to be carrying cash. Get yourself a transit card, either the Suica or the Pasmo card. They're interchangeable. And nowadays you can use them all over Japan. You don't have to worry about buying a ticket every time you go somewhere. You just beep it on the reader, and as long as you keep cash on it, you're okay. They
haven't transferred that to phones yet?
Oh, yeah, they have. Yeah, there is a phone version. I don't know how useful that would be for tourists. You know, it's something I have to look into because that's very new. They're doing a lot more for electronic cash, but that's more like for chain stores, chain restaurants, convenience stores. Like I say, if you want to get good, cheap food, mom and pop places are often the best. And most of those are cash only.
And do you have any problems with walking into an establishment like that? Because I assume, you know, off the beaten path, small restaurants may not be as, you know, for foreigners to go in if they don't speak the language or can't communicate.
Yeah, these places sometimes will not have an English menu. They will not have a picture menu. We had incredible soba at a little dinky restaurant in a business district just a couple blocks from the Sumida-gawa. And luckily they had pictures of a lot of their stuff outside. So because it was one of these places you put money in the machine and you push the button to get your ticket. It didn't have pictures on the ticket machine. It just had to text. So we would point to the photo and he would point to the machine and we would then push the button. And that worked great. And it was, it wasn't at the busiest time of day. There were only 2 other customers in the place.
Right.
So, and we just fueled ourselves up with great soba in a little tiny modest restaurant. Near most of the busy places, if you're like anywhere that's, a major shopping area, if you're like in Akihabara, if you're even out at Nakano or, in the Ginza and everything, they're going to have, most places will have an English menu. Even if they don't, they're going to be going out of the way to be accommodating to you.
Now you were there for almost a month. I'm curious, what budget did you have for a month?
I budgeted about $3,000 for essentials, including the airfare.
Including airfare?
Including airfare. Airfare was around $1,200 round trip, nonstop. We took Japan Airlines, which, by the way, has wider seats now. They actually took seats out and made the other ones wider.
Wow, that is good to know.
Taitarikon's inexpensive. We ate at a lot of mom and pop places and stuff.
So you were able to spend basically a month on the ground in Tokyo for $1,800.
Pretty much, yeah. I did buy a lot of gifts and things, and so those ranged in price from like $7 up to like 50.
But in any case, it was a pretty cheap stay, but you slept in a good place. It was safe. You ate well and had a great time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gilles. So we've been talking with Gilles Poitras. He is the author of Tokyo Stroll, a guide to city sidetracks and easy explorations, just out from Stonebridge Press. And as Giles has been saying, still very much up to date. So if you're going to Tokyo, get a copy, read it, plan your trip. So if you really want to get a good sense of what's happening in Tokyo right now, get a hold of Giles's book. And Giles, what is your website?
www.koyagi.com, and Koyagi is Koyagi.
We have your website linked on our book page on our website. So if you go to stonebridge.com and find the Tokyo Stroll book catalog page, you can get to Giles's website that way too.
Right. And also I'm on Twitter, and in Facebook, there's a Tokyo Stroll Facebook group. And it's not limited to the book. It's limited to anything Tokyo. If you want to discuss history, literature, architecture, whatever, it's a Tokyo-wide discussion group, but it's called Tokyo Stroll.
So we look forward to seeing you there. And thank you very much, Gilles.
Okay, thank you.